On February 24th, 2022, literally one of the opening moves of the Ukraine invasion was that the Russian Navy turned up at Snake Island in the Black Sea. Snake Island is a tiny island. It's not large enough to sustain itself. Basically, it's a lighthouse, and it is on the extreme southwest corner of Ukraine, just out a few miles off the coast and on the border with Romania. In the past, it has been owned by Romania, but for many years now, it's been Ukrainian, and it had a Ukrainian border guard garrison on it. Very small island, seemingly insignificant and largely forgotten, I think. But the Russian Navy saw it as important and captured it. There was no real point of the defenders attempting to withstand the Russian Navy. The warship that we saw off the coast there is a Slava-class cruiser, the flagship of the Russian Navy. That vessel will be mentioned later, of course, but you're ahead of me there. Okay, so welcome to another chat. I did a poll recently on Twitter, and this was the most requested topic, so doing it. I've got a backlog, obviously, and hopefully soon be able to return to mainly submarine-focused topics. Like my other talks, this is unscripted. I also have to add that I'm a defense analyst. I'm coming at this from the perspective of a defense analyst. I don't think that what I'm saying is particularly controversial, but hopefully it's enlightening and more informed than a lot of the information on the internet about this topic. But definitely not authoritative. Pick your other sources and so on. It's unscripted, like my other talks. That's obvious already, but I have to say that. Let's get on with it. So firstly, why did Russia want the island in the first place? There's a few major reasons for this, quite aside from the motivation of the Russian Navy to be visibly part of the invasion for propaganda reasons. But it is actually a very relevant island strategically located. If we look at the map, it's Ukrainian controlled at the start of the war. It's south of Ukraine. It's west of Crimea, which de facto is Russian and has been occupied by Russia from Ukraine since 2014. Its main use before and since has been surveillance. It can monitor an area of ocean. Very approximately is this sort of area. I've done this in PowerPoint. The exact distance would depend on the systems and so on, but it's not that far. But all the same, it can monitor a sector of the Black Sea. And this is a sector that Russia didn't already have that strong a monitoring of. Russia already had taken control of a lot of oil and gas platforms in the Black Sea, and those similarly provide the same sort of level of surveillance. They have radars and possibly jammers and things like that on them, and they can monitor traffic and support warships and other things. People often talk about it in the context of the shipping route to Odesa and the export of grain. I think some of that's a little bit political. It is true that the island is just close to that main shipping lane, just off to the west of that lane. And so every ship passing in the main shipping lane is going to be observed by that island, whether or not they're declared themselves. However, I think it's overstated in some respects. The blockade itself is enforced principally by the Russian Navy. Again, in the first couple of days of the war, they started attacking merchant ships. Now, I don't think they've admitted it was them, but it's pretty obvious. I don't think anyone really contests that. This particular example, this ship burnt off Odessa for days, and it's still there, completely destroyed, as you can see. Now, with the threat to these ships, it's coming mainly from Russian Navy surface vessels. These, much later in the war, you can see these two operating together. One's got an assault helicopter, one has got an air defense system on it for close-in protection. There's a whole range of Russian warships. They can board, send warning shots, and so on. And they definitely deter completely merchant ships. So Russia doesn't need Snake Island at all to do this. It could have done the blockade without Snake Island. It just used its service vessels. And if it came to a real sort of shooting war type blockade, it also has submarines, such as this improved Kilo class you can see leaving Sevastopol later in the war. This is a candid shot, obviously open source intelligence, and a file image of the Bastion P, which is the Onyx anti-ship missile. This is supersonic anti-ship missile. There are other anti-ship missiles that Russia has, of course. These can dominate shipping lanes. But these can't send warning shots. They can't do boardings, so on. They're only relevant if you're out to actually sink vessels. So on the island itself, Russia did not deploy anti-ship weapons. It did not deploy a direct means of attacking ships that are passing. It didn't need to. Instead, it deployed air defenses. And they were point air defenses, such principally the TOR system, which we see here. This is just a file image of a TOR system from the Russian government during the invasion. You can see the Z on it. But it's this type of system they deployed there. And this is a relatively short-range system, and it's for defending the islands. It's not for projecting air defense over Ukraine. The third or second main reason, is as part of an invasion. We got to remember that when it seized the island, Russia was intending to do amphibious landings in the sort of area of Odessa, either to support an overland attack on Odessa or to build a route through towards Moldova. And we know this principally because President Lukashenko of Belarus actually told the world. This is pretty indiscreet. I assume he intended to do this. But if you look quite closely at that map, you can see a landing in the region of Odessa. And it's heading towards Transnistria, which is part of Moldova, but it's a Russian sympathizing sort of breakaway state, as it were. Now, that threat is still there. But if you were making these landings, you would not want Ukrainian forces surveillance of your flank. And it would have been on the southern flank of those invasion routes, probably. So it's relevant there as well. But the third reason, and probably the biggest reason, at least in my view, is because it's territory. Even though it's only a small bit of rock, it comes with real estate, mostly water. And the Ukrainian EEZ, exclusive economic zone, is already quite large. And as you can see, it's shaped somewhat. The line between it and Romania was already positively influenced in Ukraine's favor by the possession of Snake Island. Had Romania not given Snake Island up years earlier, and talking decades earlier, then the exclusive economic zone would have been shaped quite differently in Romania's favor. Now, these waters, as it happens, between the Snake Island and Crimea have oil and gas in them. So they're suddenly quite relevant. Now, since 2014, Russia's already claimed a large chunk of that exclusive economic zone and de facto controls it based on Crimea. And they call this the Crimean exclusive economic zone. I'm not going to go into politics of it. You can guess it's pretty obvious. De facto, Russia's controlling that. Now, they also have the Sea of Azov completely at this stage. I'm recording this on the 2nd of July. Now, in any future sort of normalization, you can see that whether or not Russia controls Odessa to completely take the Black Sea exclusive economic zone, it would be able to carve off some sort of a large chunk just based on Snake Island alone. And that large chunk might include oil and gas and certainly include shipping lanes. So there's that reason, it's territory. So what happened on the battle? In the early days, after it was captured by the cruiser, not a lot. You can see this is a low resolution satellite image, but you can see the cruiser there just off the coast, along with a spy ship and another patrol boat. And there's some merchant vessels in this image. At this point in the war, there were still merchant vessels wondering whether or not the blockade was, what's happening, whether to go north to Odessa or not. They didn't. So Snake Island was used for the blockade or supporting it, but the blockade was carried out by ships. Also, the cruiser continued to operate around that area and in that sort of corner of the Black Sea. Principally, I think it provided air defense. It had an S-300F system on it, which was a pretty good deterrent to Ukrainian Air Force, and including drones. But the bigger factor why nothing much happened was the focus of the war was elsewhere. This is a photo of Kiev. I think it's pretty representative of that stage of the war. Ukraine did not have the energy, the weapons, or the priorities to go after Snake Island. And so Snake Island remained just a Russian garrison for a couple of months, probably quite a nice one. But the tide of the war started to change. Russia got major setbacks around Kiev and was unable to essentially conquer the country. And on April the 13th, its flagship, Moskva, that ship that had been providing air defense, was sunk. Actually sunk the next day under tow, April the 14th. This photo, you can see, or you can deduce that 2 Neptune anti-ship missiles did hit it amidships. Got a separate video on that. And it sunk, like I say. This was a major setback and will be one of the major naval topics, case studies for years to come. But additionally, it had an impact on Snake Island. It took away that umbrella of air defense. And slowly, the Ukrainian forces were able to start deploying and have the focus really to start taking on the Snake Island garrison. Principally, they used the TB2 drone. This is armed with quite small missiles. It's Turkish made. It's got a fearsome reputation in Syria and in Libya, even before Ukraine, much more so from Ukraine. It's not always the principal weapon, but it allows them to observe and target things with other weapons as well. On May the 2nd and then May the 8th, that TB2 drone took on Russian Navy fast boats, in particular Raptor assault boats. These are general purpose troop transports, very fast, very much based, pretty directly influenced on the Swedish CB-90. 4 of them were destroyed or substantially damaged. Even though the missiles are quite small, the bombs rather, the guided bombs that the TB2 launches, they could be devastating to a tiny boat like this. They'd definitely be an annoyance to a larger boat. Those same systems were able to take on the air defenses on Snake Island. Even though the Tor is very sophisticated, the Ukrainians, with time on their hands, were able to take those out quite dramatically. And with those air defenses gone, the local air defenses, they could start using fighter jets to bomb the island. And on May the 7th, and I think over the next couple of days, nearly all the buildings on the island were destroyed. It went from being a tiny sort of lighthouse, building complex, essentially, to just a barren rubble rock. The Russians persisted, though. They tried to land more air defenses to replace the ones that had been removed, because the lack of air defenses was making it ever easier for Ukraine to dominate it with its TB2 drones and other air assets. This is a small landing craft, a Surma, landing another Tor system. The dark spot in the middle is the Tor system. It's running at the moment. This is just moments before it was hit by a bomb and blew up. And they actually sunk it right on the ramp, so it took some time for the Russians to clear. The Russians continued ferrying in air defenses, principally point air defense systems, obviously fuel, food, and things like that, we assume as well. They could use helicopters, but for these heavier systems, they had to use landing ships or landing craft. And here is a crane ship and a landing craft working together to deliver a Panzer gun SAM system. This Panzer is very much in the same sort of same space, as it were, as the Tor. It does have a gun as well. You could argue forever which one is better. Russia uses them pretty much the same way. Also, in mid-June, the harpoons that NATO or Western countries had donated or provided to Ukraine started to be felt. The first victim of these was a tugboat, SB739. Now, tugboat is much more military relevant than it sounds. It's not just for towing things around. It was used as utility. It had a missile system on the back of it, and so on. So the supply vessels being used were taking ever greater risks. Additionally, Ukraine started to receive more and more artillery from the West. In particular, call out the Caesar 155 millimeter system, very good reputation. It's supplied by France, and multiple launch rocket systems supplied by America. These both have range long enough to hit Snake Island. Now, the Ukrainians did have some systems that could hit Snake Island already, but these are much more modern and accurate. And even if they were not used yet, and we don't know whether the MLR, the multiple launch rocket system, had been used, the threat of using them is pretty substantial. So, for example, June 27th, we can see artillery strikes on the island, and these are observed by a TB2 drone. That's what the video is coming from. But the islands can just be bombarded from Ukrainian territory. Say we don't know the system used, but general speculation is probably a Caesar battery. And on June the 30th, there was a sudden withdrawal of Russian forces. They did it in the night by a small boat, apparently, and left a smoldering island. Now, a lot of this fire is probably caused by Ukraine, of course, but some of the fire that they left was probably caused by themselves, destroying things as they went. They described it as goodwill gesture, in particular, the suggestion that it demonstrates that they're not blocking grain. At this stage in the war, the blockade is really being felt by the whole world, because Ukraine traditionally exports a lot of grain, and there's serious concern about famine and so on. There's sort of pinch of salt with this. It's a setback for Russia. And as we've said, they didn't need to have Snake Island to affect a blockade. All they have to do is not shoot at ships. They can occupy Snake Island and still let things past. And they didn't have any guns or weapon systems on Snake Island geared at shooting ships that go past. They didn't need it. So what are they giving up? Well, obviously, they are giving up the territorial claim. And I think this is the major one. At any future peace talks, any political solution to the problem, if there's a carving up of Ukraine, I know that Ukrainians are not keen on this. In fact, many people are not keen on this, but in those sorts of scenarios, they have one less bargaining chip, and they're less likely to walk away with an increase in the economic zone and oil and gas route of that area of the Black Sea. So they are giving up quite a bit, even though it's just a rock. I don't think they've been using the rock as a area air defense. They're not giving it up for that. And I think that the invasion, particularly towards Transnistria, might still be on the cards. It's ever diminishing. And, I think people wrote it off quite early. We've got to be aware that it might still happen. It would be happening because of political and strategic goals, not because of the tactical usefulness of it. This island not being controlled by Russia gives them an increased risk, particularly mainly of surveillance on their southern flank of that invasion. So Ukraine might want to plant their own flag back there again, and they might see it as theirs still, of course. But if they did, they would have the same problem, perhaps more so than Russia did, sorry. The Russians also have a lot of systems, especially much longer range systems, that can hit Snake Island accurately from their own territory in Crimea or just off the coast of Crimea. So particularly the Bastion P, which is the land-based version of the Onyx, that's stationed in Crimea and could hit Snake Island. Caliber cruise missiles, of course, which are launched from ships and submarines, they can launch them from the ports and still hit Snake Island. Of course, cheaper naval gunfire. This runs a risk of being hit by Harpoon missiles, of course, but not out of the question at all. They could come in and fire at you. And air-launched weapons. This is the backfire bomber with one of its KH-22 or AS-4 kitchen missiles. Russia perhaps wanted to send a message, has already done its own bombing attacks on the island, possibly to destroy what it left there, more likely to send a message. This is from July 1. The aircraft is reportedly an Su-30 SM flanker. This is a reference image of it. You can see that it dropped a couple of bombs, one missed, one hit, but the message is pretty clear. So at this stage, there's still lots of fog of war. There's still lots we don't know, but that gives you a pretty good idea, I think. Russia is giving up a lot on this island, but they don't want Ukraine to take it back, perhaps for propaganda reasons, perhaps because of its surveillance, perhaps because of its long-term strategic goals, but they have given up a lot. Okay, that was a talk. I say it was unscripted. Hopefully it's useful, hopefully interesting. If you do like it, please share, please subscribe, and so on. Thank you very much.